Hey everybody, I'm Vinny Francois. This is In the Moment, and here with the second episode of talking about Harold's with Will Hines. Hey Will.
Hi, Vinny. How are you? Hello, everybody.
I'm doing great. You're looking well?
Yes, thank you. How are you? You also look well.
Yeah, we just finished the holidays, so I guess we are well fed and
Yep.
perhaps well rested. I don't know.
Well rested. Yeah, we're fattened up and ready for the new year.
Ready to be devoured by the new year.
Yeah.
So if people have never heard of a Harold, it's a form of improv, long form, meaning that it is not just a self-contained 3-minute scene, and it's got several parts to it, right? Why don't you list them out?
Yeah, there's a set structure. You get a suggestion, and then you do an opening, which is a little ritual to turn the suggestion into a bunch of ideas. Then you do your first beats, which are 3 scenes, each of which is taking a different idea from the opening. Then you do a group game. Oh, the scenes usually start with 2 people each. They have less than the whole group in them, at least. Because then the 4th scene is the group game where pretty much everybody's in it, taking yet another idea from the opening. Then you do second beats, where you revisit each of your 3 first beats in order and sort of do like sequels to them. Then you do a second group game where everybody's kind of in it. And then you do third beats where you revisit the beats, but now they're starting to intersect and overlap with each other. Like characters from one show up in the other, and ideas and motifs from one show up in the other. And once you get a really big connection, you end it.
Cool. So I think in this episode we wanted to concentrate more on the opening and the first beat, just to kind of give this talk some kind of structure. So maybe talk about the opening. Like what does it look like? What does it do? What's its function?
Okay, so the opening is the most contentious part of the Herald. It's the part that if you're a Herald team, you spend the most time arguing about, and it can destroy you. It can destroy your whole team because opening should really only last 3 minutes or 5 minutes at the absolute most. More like 3.5 minutes. And your whole Herald's going to be like 25 minutes or half an hour. So the opening is not a big part of it. Yet you will discuss it 90% of the time.
Okay.
Because there's not really a formula or rules for how to do it. It just is supposed to be roughly like an overture to the rest of the piece, where we dabble and explore ideas from the suggestion, and then we can pull from it for our scenes. So it could be almost anything. Like I've seen Heralds where they get a suggestion on the most minimal side. They'll get a suggestion, and then everybody just goes down the line and says like one sentence that the suggestion inspires in them, with the idea that they're trying to expand it, you know?
Right.
The suggestion will be comb, and then one person will just be like, I got to get ready for school today. And the next person, they'll all be like in character, you know? And the next person will be like, hope she likes me, pretending to get his hair ready. The next person will be like, we're going to dig up every piece of crap we can get on this guy or something. And then after everybody says one, the opening's done. Okay. And then you start your first beats, and the beats are going to take one of those ideas as an inspiration and start, you know?
Right. So you're looking to generate ideas to get your first beats off and running.
That's right.
Because you need at least 3, right?
You need at least 3. Usually technically you need 5 ideas for your Herald, 3 for the first beats, and then 2 group games.
Okay.
Rule of thumb we always tell ourselves is if you walk out of the opening with 3, you'll be all set. The group games you'll figure out as you get there.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
and I guess that's like the minimal one, and then I guess it can get quite elaborate from there.
Yeah, see, here's the whole thing. Like, this is the reason why the discussions go forever, is like every teacher who teaches the Herald kind of has their own preferences over what counts as gospel for an opening.
Okay.
There is no gospel. Like I was in a Herald team that used to skip the opening. That's seen as sort of sacrilege, but we would just get a suggestion and start doing the beats. And then that same team, we basically hated doing the opening, so we would try to avoid it at any which way we could. I didn't hate it, but my team did.
Right.
Another one was we would get an audience member up and interview them, and the interview would sort of be the opening.
Okay.
The things that they said. And we just said, oh, yeah, that's the interview opening, which technically is allowed. Okay, but like there is at UCB, see, I don't know how they do it at IO, but at UCB, we did teach sort of a according to Hoyle structured opening.
Okay.
To base everything else on. Should I tell you that now?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So it's called the pattern game, which is like a word association thing where like if the suggestion's comb, everybody gets into like a half circle and they start doing like word association off of comb, right? So comb, like, what does comb make you think of, for example?
Like a comb over, say.
Okay. So then you try to riff on comb over for a little bit, like comb over, vanity, lying, denial, toupee, middle age, crisis. Okay. And then, after that many, you're sort of done with comb over.
Okay.
And so you, as a group, you sort of know like, okay, that's enough of that. Let's like, what did I just say? Crisis. Let's get away from crisis into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Go from crisis into like, I don't know, ambulance, overnight shift, exhausted, getting too much out of people, pushing yourself too hard, adrenaline. And now we're sort of in a new realm of idea.
Okay. So you usually kind of like A to get to B and then use B to get to C.
Yeah. Yes. A to C is a term that we use to be like change the subject, keep it like somewhat related, but make a big leap, go A to C instead of A to B. So like you say comb to comb over, that's A to B. That's like
right.
Close. But then if I say comb over midlife crisis, that's kind of A to C. Like you can totally see how it's related, but I'm making a little bit of a bigger leap.
Okay.
So you A to C is what we would say. It's like, oh, we got to change the subject. We got to A to C it here.
All right.
But the other metaphor we use in openings is rooms and hallways. Okay. So hallways is when you're changing the subject, and a room is when you're kind of hanging out around an idea for a while.
Interesting.
Come over midlife crisis. If the next bunch after midlife crisis is like sports car, affair, erectile dysfunction, quitting your job, that's a room built around midlife crisis.
I see.
And we're not like moving on. We're just like, we're digging into it a little bit. So rooms and hallways.
Okay. So rooms you spend time in, hallways get you to a different place.
We're changing the subject. We're trying to get away from something.
Okay. I get it. And so your openings can just have different ways of generating these ideas, and they I guess are they just different presentations of idea generations, I guess?
Yeah, they're real weird. They're like, they are supposed to be like an overture. You're supposed to like group mind, little artsy, but pragmatically speaking, you're looking for good ideas for your scenes. You're supposed to do all that.
Okay, so when you say group mind, it's also partly to get everyone on the same page, like, hey, where are we all at?
Yeah, if I say come over and you say midlife crisis, we're trying to get
on that.
We're trying to like, okay, yeah, here,
Okay. And when you say artsy, you mean like it should be a little bit theatrical. It should be like a little bit.
It shouldn't look scenic.
Okay.
It should feel distinct from the rest of it. It should be like, oh yeah, they did this weird thing up top before they did their scenes.
And so, what are some of the openings that really that you're like, what is happening?
I got lost. The pattern game has a structure. A pattern game has 3 loops.
Okay.
We call them clover leaves. So you start at comb, and then you do like a hallway, a room, and come back to comb.
Okay.
Like we're just all as a group knowing that we're gonna try to get back to comb after a minute.
I see.
And then you go off of comb in a different direction, right? So if the first one went comb over, midlife crisis, blah, 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 emergency room, blah, 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 comb, then the second leaf should go in a brand new direction.
Okay.
So comb, you might say like search, detectives, murder mysteries. And now we're on the second leaf, and you come back to comb, and then you do a third leaf, and you come back to comb, and then you sweep it, and your opening's done.
I see.
So it has a 3 is a big number in the Herald. There's lots of 3s.
Right.
So like this gives a rule of 3 in your opening, 3 leaves. Did I do that right? Yeah. And you're looking to come out with 3 pretty good meaty ideas. Could have more. You could have 5, maybe. And when I say you have 3, I mean you'll have way more than that. You'll have like, I don't know, 10 or something.
Right.
But 3 that we all agree, 3 that we all heard and felt, that we all have confidence that we all know.
And that you're all on the same page. Like, these are the 3.
Yeah. That if we asked everybody in the group, what were the main ideas of the opening? There'll be 3 that's in everybody's list.
Right. And that sounds like a skill that takes time to develop.
Absolutely. A team learning how to do an opening well is crucial.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like the foundation of the whole set.
It's not just, yes, absolutely. It is, but the weird part of it is it's like a different muscle. Like as soon as you start the scenes, you're back into just doing improv.
Right.
It's its own little skill set that you have to get good at. It involves, abstract communication where you're not speaking literally, you're speaking like in little code. Memory, you have to be able to remember a lot of stuff. And that's super hard when you start, but it gets easier. Knowing how to signal to each other that we like an idea and we're going to remember this one. And then like, what's a good idea? Like every group kind of has their own version of what counts as a good idea.
Right.
Some people want them very realistic and grounded. Some people want them really silly and absurd and just blatantly funny.
Right. Really, and is there pressure to be funny in the opening?
Sure, because I mean, only in that there's always pressure to be funny, and this is the beginning of the show, and if you doubt yourself and you doubt improv, you're going to want to prove it to the audience that it's funny.
Right.
And the opening is the hardest to make overtly funny.
It seems like it. I mean, are there some openings that you've seen that are like, oh, this is just always going to be funny?
Yeah, some are funnier than others. Character openings tend to be funnier.
So what's a character opening?
Like, okay, I've seen one that's like called a flock, where like, get the suggestion comb, one person comes out and starts doing a character inspired by the idea of comb, and everybody else comes behind that person and like mirrors that person. Like they are all trying to ape and be that character, and everyone's like chiming in the same kind of voice, as if they're one person,
right?
But many heads speaking for him.
Okay.
Somebody will break out. That's the flock, and then someone will break out and go do another thing based on comb, and you'll all go over to that, and then you'll do a third. So now you've got 3, and then you'll go back to the first, and you'll try to revisit each of them 3 times, 3 times 3, quick, and then sweep.
Oh, interesting. It's like almost a mini Harold.
Yeah.
Right off the top.
That's right. It's hard to not. It's when you first learn an opening, you'll spend too long on it, and then you'll be faster.
Right. Right.
But the flock is fun.
It's supposed to be like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, the flock will be like 4.
Okay.
And the flock is fun. It's a character. You're talking right to the audience. It's more accessible. Maybe it's not funny, but it's more accessible and fun. Usually, it's funny.
Are there some, like, I mean, you must have seen like a bunch of Heralds, obviously. Are there some openings that you've like stand out specifically? Like, oh, that night, that opening like was kind of insane and never see the like of it again?
Yes. I've seen many. There was a group in New York a million years ago called Arsenal that had Chris Gethard on it, who a lot of improv nerds know, and Peter Gwynn, who a lot of improv nerds will know, and a lot of other really good people. And they made it a point to not have a set opening. They'd get a suggestion and try to do a structure that was inspired by the suggestion. So like if they got argument, they might try to do like they would set up and do like Houses of Parliament debating. Like they would sit on very vaguely in a dreamlike way, be sitting on the opposite sides of the stage and be like lifting up and like debating, sir, I say that this, that, or the other. And they would try to riff through like 3 general topics and then sweep it.
Okay.
The Arsenal openings were always sort of like, damn, girl, how'd you do that? But it wouldn't always work. Like sometimes the suggestion would be untenable and they would biff it.
Right. High risk, high reward.
Yeah. But they were good. Like Peter and Chris especially were very decisive and clear. So they would make a big choice early and the team would sort of follow. Not always them, but
right.
They set the pace.
And are there some openings that you personally like, I have no time for this? Like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, if they're too long and complicated, if there's just too many things to do, I'm like, just get to the show. I like it more minimalist and slimmed down.
Right.
So basically any opening that goes over 4 minutes, I'm like, I don't have time for this. But that's not true of everybody. Yeah, there's certain musical openings where they'll improvise little songs.
Okay.
And I'm like, you're just doing a scene. You're doing a little show in the opening. It's too much. It's too overcooked, for my opinion.
Sure. And yeah, I guess avoiding scenes is what you want. You don't want it to be a scene because the rest of your show is going to be scenes.
Right. You want to avoid a scenic. However, see, this is where we can argue because there's not a rule. Some people, as an opening, do a scene. They'll do a scene and then deconstruct that scene for their herald. They'll do like a deliberately talky, info dumpy scene.
Okay.
And then that scene is it'll be like 2 people at dinner talking, you know what I mean? Having a conversation, which they just riff about the suggestion a bunch.
Okay. And then they break it down into 3 ideas, or there's 3 ideas that come up in that conversation?
Now, here's where you can get in an argument. A coach might be like, hey, man, where's your clover leaves? Where's your 3? And they might say, like, we're not doing 3. And they have an hour-long argument over whether you need to do 3. Then they'll be like, okay, we'll try to do 3. And they'll try to roughly hit on 3 things, maybe. Okay.
Amazing. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like there's any
one. It is, I'm being cynical about it. I mostly am. I do actually love an opening when it's done well. It's super cool. It's basically like you have to have real faith in yourself as a team because you open with this very artistic, inaccessible, abstract thing. And if you communicate to the audience that you don't believe in it, the whole show is going to die.
Right.
So you got to have confidence in your opening. It's basically like an acid test of commitment. Do you believe in yourself?
Okay.
But I guess I speak of it cynically because I'm like, oh, if you're going to try the opening, you got to come correct. You got to be real specific with your team. These are the rules for our opening. Yes, you can do it anyway. Here's the way we're going to do it. These rules are strict.
Okay.
We're going to have 3 topics. It's going to be 4 minutes. We're going to do rooms and hallways, or whatever. Or we're not going to. But there's no doubt we're all on the same page. And here's an example of the types of initiations that we want to get out of the opening. This is a good one. This is about, you got to have that conversation.
Okay, interesting.
The rest of your herald, you're very open. What makes a good scene can stay you can roll with it. But for your opening, you got to lock it down.
So it sounds like for a herald team, your opening is almost your signature. It's like, this is our jam. This is our thing.
Yep. Now I'll give you even more information. I think among veterans, there's 3 openings that are counted as real openings. Real in the dumb sense of like legit.
Right.
Them. One is the pattern game. Okay. 3 cloverleaf word association, rooms and hallways. The second one is the invocation, which is, have you heard of that?
I have heard of it. I've seen it. But please explain it.
The invocation is something that Del Close came up with. And there's a very specific structure to it where you get the suggestion of an object. And there's actually 4 sections. There's 3 and then like a little coda. First, everybody starts saying, the phases are called it is, you are, thou art, I am. So for the it is, everyone is standing around it. If the suggestion is like postage stamp, then everyone says, it is sticky, it is square, it is a blue background, it is a picture of Elvis Presley, it has been canceled. Physical descriptions of an example of that object. Then at some point somebody says you are, you are a thing that I never know how much it costs. You know, you're a thing that I never have any of at home. And the you are section is personal and emotional associations. We're getting like a little deeper, a little more like personal.
Personal. Yeah.
Yeah. And most of your scene ideas will come from the you are section. Then you go to thou art, where you take all the stuff said in you are, you try to generalize it into themes, you know, thou art a symbol of a forgotten age. You know, thou art a fluctuating price that is not known. You sort of try to speak flowery and grand.
Right.
You know, thou art a token of communication. And then after you do that for a little while, you go to I am, where everyone is just saying 1 or 2 word themes that come out of everything you've said. You know, I am communication. I am fluctuation. I am collection. I am, you know, writing. I am heritage. I am postage stamp.
Okay.
And it's dramatic. It's pretty easy to do once you practice it. It is satisfying to watch because there's this build and it ends big.
Mm-hmm.
I think Del was a Wiccan, where he like was doing like Wiccan pagan rituals, and this was borrowed from the Wiccan culture in some fashion. So it's supposed to kind of feel creepy and witch-like, you know,
Right.
like invoking
Invocation's already the name is
Yeah,
pretty.
the invocation is a pretty creepy name. So like, or pretty like ominous sort of. So yeah, you're supposed to be invoking the spirit of it.
Right.
And so most vets will agree, oh yeah, the invocation, that's a real opening. That's Del's opening, so we respect it.
Right.
And it's good at turning something into themes. It's very artsy. It's not so good at giving you like funny ideas. At the UCB, the invocation was not in vogue when I was a student. Like you would learn it in classes and nobody wanted to do it. They thought it was too corny.
Right.
Weird. But then there was this group called Mailer Demon who, for some reason, they started doing it and they were great at it. They had complete commitment. They had fire and brimstone. They were super funny. Like all of their things were very clever. And then everybody started doing the invocation.
Right. Man, you can do anything with commitment and it'll sell.
And it has to work. Like they were funny too. They definitely were committed, but they also were clever. Like they had things that were intriguing that you'd want to unpack in scenes.
Okay, interesting.
They weren't just blowhards, you know. They were smart.
Cool. Okay, so we have the Cloverleaf, we have the invocation, and you said the third one?
Sound and movement.
Sound and movement. So what's that one?
Oh man. Okay, so
did I open Pandora's box here?
Yeah. I mean the opening is Pandora's box.
Right.
Sound and movement is I mean it's okay, you get a suggestion and then you start by doing nonverbal, like physical movement reaction to the suggestion.
I can already tell how you feel about this opening.
I actually do love it. It's just, you got to do it right. To me, the sound and movement is the epitome of improv in that it's completely goofy and dumb looking. Like if you're a cynical stand-up comedian or a cynical person who thinks improv is dumb, sound and movement is going to confirm your worst.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's also the best of improv because it works. And it can save teams, and it can really let you tap into cool parts of your brain. Okay. And I was on a team. Okay, I was on that team that didn't want to do openings, right?
Right.
And a coach made us do sound and movement in rehearsal, and we were doing it. And I'll explain a little bit. There's a little bit more structure to it. But it worked. It opened us up.
Okay.
Against all odds, we found that it made our scenes so much better. It made us agree and commit and open up and play with a lot of swagger. And I walked away with a lot of respect for it. I was like, you know what? It saved us. It's kind of like we have to humble ourselves at the beginning of the show and make ourselves vulnerable and physical, and then we're ready to be real performers.
Okay, interesting.
So the sound and movement is you start with this kind of physical gloopy gloop, nonverbal, just gibberish noises and things inspired by the suggestion, right? And then you're watching each other and you allow it to transform. You're all kind of staying together. You're all kind of copying each other. And you sort of stay together. That's the hallway. And then shortly into it, 20 seconds, maybe like 30 or 40 seconds into it, it should suddenly kind of look like not just gibberish, but a clear setting of some kind. Guys making pizzas, maybe people running in a marathon, mailman, I don't know why I'm stuck on mail, delivering mail, just something that's recognizable. And when you, as a group, you realize it, you allow it to just fully become that, and you just do that setting for a second. And during that, you can talk now.
Okay.
As the mailman, but you're not doing a scene. It's just like a vision of mailmen on their routes or something. That's a room. And then after you're in that for like 15 seconds, somebody just makes an abstract move and you're out of the room and you're back into the soup.
Okay.
And you look to get 3 to 5 rooms. And those are sort of analogous to the clover leaves. And then you sweep it. You try to get back to the beginning and sweep it.
Okay. And so what are the ideas that you're pulling from those? Just mailroom, mail thing?
Yeah, almost none. This is the big disadvantage of this opening is you get almost no ideas out of it. You basically start with like a physical gesture or just a who, what, where,
Okay.
you know, a mailman on his route. You really don't get much of a start. But what you do get is, especially if there's like a thinky team that is scared and is not committing, I'm 1,000% sure this is great to do in rehearsal.
Okay.
I'm a little more doubtful for a show, but I've seen it work great in a show. It's harder in a show. But if it's a team that's not committing, as the coach, you're like, we're doing a Sound of Movement opening. Everybody go in big. And so you go in big, you sweep it, and then even though no one has any ideas, people just pop off the back line. Their faces are like more reactive. You know, they're committing. They're just decisive. It wakes you up.
Right. Because your whole body's engaged, your mind's engaged.
Your body's been engaged. You've just been copying physically without thinking too much about what's happening. Like I was a convert because it kind of saved this team. We were fighty and judgy and critical, and we did this, and our scenes were fun. It gave us the silliness we needed. So for the right team, again, in rehearsal, everyone should do this if you're doing the Herald. It is a great exercise.
Okay.
And for a lot of people, it's a good show. Another old team at the UCB called Optimus International. This Chris Guthrie was also on this team, but Jack McBrayer was on this team. He's a guy, famous actor, great Chicago improviser who moved to New York for a while. Rob Corddry, Brian Husky, a lot of old school, Shannon O'Neill, a lot of old UCB names. You might not know those names, but at UCB, they're all big names.
I recognize most of them.
They would do a Sound of Movement opening, and they would crush it. They were such good clowns. They were just so good physically. They were very specific, really sharp at watching each other. It was a blast. And, yeah, then they had to do more work on their scenes to actually convert that to ideas, but they were good at that too.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so that's the Sound of Movement. So the pattern game, which is the cloverleaf, the invocation, and the Sound of Movement, those are your 3 primary colors of openings.
Okay.
Oh, the other one is, which is not considered, what veterans look down on, but is used a lot as monologue openings.
Okay.
This is very easy to do. You get a suggestion, somebody comes forward and tells a true story inspired by the suggestion, short, like 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most, short little anecdote. And then 2 other people do that. So you get 3 true stories off the suggestion. There's your 3.
Okay.
And then the scenes come out of the stories.
And those are not looked upon favorably.
Because there's no group mind. It's like everyone is just doing a little solo jam.
I see.
No group work. But it's clear, it's entertaining to the audience, it's truthful, it's easy, like it's a good training wheels opening. You can get 3 out, you can get rule of 3s out of it by doing 3. It's very easy to remember what happened because we're good at telling stories and remember them. So like very common for brand new Herald teams to do monologue opening. But it's training wheels because you're not grouping, you're not doing group stuff.
I get it.
Yeah.
And are there some that used to be in vogue and you don't see in vogue like currently anymore? Like where did that opening go?
Yeah, scene painting used to be big at UCB. So scene painting is where you come out, you use screenplay language to paint a scene. Give me a suggestion, Vinny.
Furniture store.
Okay, so I'd start right. I would do A to B. I always like trying to use the suggestion if I can. So where do we see a furniture store? It's a warehouse version where it's a huge empty room with like big padded sofas as far as the eye could see. That might be as much as I do. And then if you were on my team, you would come out, either tag me gently on the shoulder, or maybe you would just start talking and you would just pick up where I left off and try to yes and it.
Okay.
All I said is that the room was big and there's a lot of sofas, but you would try to yes and that and then throw in your own thing, you know? Yes.
So like kind of populating that space.
Yeah. Scene painting, like we're just describing the environment.
Right.
That's because there's a movie form which does an improvised movie, and that opens with painting 3 scenes using screenplay language. And so people said, oh, let's do that for a Herald. Let's use the scene painting convention as a Herald opening. So scene painting goes in vogue sometimes at UCB, and then it goes away.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and so I guess this is a good point to transition to first beat. So now you've done your opening, you've got hopefully 3 good ideas, or at least collectively you've got 3 ideas.
Yeah.
And you've got to launch into your first beats. And so what are you looking for there?
All right. Now we're in it.
Yeah, now we're in it.
Well, you know, the group has to agree. Generally, you want the initiation to be very clearly connected to the opening. You want the audience to be able to see, oh yeah, that comes from that weird thing they just did. Like, you want the satisfaction of being connected to your opening. You also want it just to be a good improv initiation. You want it to be like in the middle of something between people who are invested and are knowledgeable and competent at what's happening, you know, just like any good initiation. And then maybe you want it to be funny.
Yeah.
It's like dangerous to say that, I guess, but it helps if you can start with either something unusual or at least hinting, at least something that needs to be explained, you know, something intriguing.
So that needs to be addressed in some way.
Yeah, a phrase that a student, another improviser I know in New York named Curtis Rutherford said is something to unpack.
Okay.
Like just something that you want to know more about.
And you said it was dangerous to say that it should be funny. Like, why is it
Tell people to
dangerous?
be funny. If you tell people to be funny, they usually go too crazy.
Oh,
too,
right. I see what you're saying.
Too wacky. You tell people who have good taste. Start with something funny, but I mean like lowercase funny. Like just give me a little hint of something weird afoot.
Right, right.
Build from it. The audience just had to sit through 3.5 minutes of artistry. Let's reward them with a concrete comedic promise.
Right. So in Canada and a whole bunch of other parts of the world, like Keith Johnstone is the improv guru.
Right.
And like his instruction is always, instead of like, I guess would be to be more boring. Like instead of going to crazy town, just be more boring. Like you'll still get the funny. Don't worry about it.
I mean, if you're okay, yeah. I've given that note, and the power of it is evident, and it's a good one. But I think that applies to scenes where there is no opening and you're starting from nothing, and your first mission is just to establish credibility and reality and like a world. I think in that case, be more boring is really good advice. Like be real, just let's just feel each other as people and connect. Right. That matters a lot. But now we have an opening. We basically have to be sketch writers for one line. We just have to we have to craft something from this overture. So I've tried doing this myself. It's tough. That's a tough ask, right? To have an idea and then you got one line and maybe like a facial expression to sell this whole thing. Yeah. It's absolutely difficult. Although it, like anything else, if you just practice it, it gets easy fast. You just have to know that the first couple times you do it, it's going to suck.
Okay. Well, like anything.
Yeah, but like it's really tough in improv because you know in your head, if you say, oh, let's just get rid of the opening and just start from nothing. I know how to make that good. It's very tempting to do that. But the power of the opening is you get to start, you skip the boring part and start right in the middle of some fun stuff.
Right.
It's a great skill to have. And it really builds the writer part of your improv brain. Like so much of improv is acting, which is lovely. But this fires up the left brain, you know? The smarty pants robot guys and girls in your group are gonna love the opening because it lets them think a little bit. Just to get us started. And then it gets easy because some people are amazing at having fully formed ideas. They're just so funny. But you don't have to be a brilliant comedian. Being intriguing is enough, you know? Having something that just begs more explanation, that works just as well, and it's not so hard to do that.
Right.
Just like a little, I'm actually not really that good at openings. It's something that I am currently practicing with myself. I have been good at it in the past, but I've atrophied. So I'm trying to be a little bit better. But what I will do, barring anything, is I just try to say something that's a little mysterious,
Mm-hmm.
like you know, well, I did one this past week. It was I don't know, sir. I'd like to buy your farm. I don't know. To me, is like just begging a question of like, oh, why is he all of a sudden trying to buy a farm? I know it doesn't sound funny at all, but it's like this
No,
in the middle.
it's like a good premise. It's somewhere to start.
Yeah, it's not. It's actually not a good premise, but it is not a bad beginning. We can unfold from there.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean premise in the term.
Oh, no, premise is a loaded term at UCB. Premise means it is an evident comedic idea.
Okay.
Premise would be like, sweetheart, it's time to spice up our relationship, and that's why starting today I'm going to be hunting you.
Okay.
That's a clear, big comedic idea right out in the first line.
Okay, I see.
I'm not even saying whether you think it's funny or not, but it is a clear pitch of a funny idea, right?
Okay. So it seems like the opening is your brainstorm session. We get everybody on the same page, and then like, all right, here's our ideas that we're going with.
Yeah. If you can get out of your opening, initiate a clear idea, and then actually get into the groove of the improv scene, the rest of the Herald is cake.
Okay.
The hardest part is you basically, and this is very UCB. I think other improv communities put less pressure on the beginning to be written, and so it's a little bit easier. But I would say this way is a skill you got to learn. It's like the opening's very abstract. The opening is not scenic. The initiation is a little bit writerly. So those are two groups of muscles that you don't normally work doing just open scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Get those two muscles down, then you can just get to your scenic muscles. It's all cream cheese from there.
It's a good cake.
Yeah. But it's I mean, it's like I say, 90% of your discussion as a Herald team will be like, what opening do we do? What's our first beat initiation?
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot more sense now that you've explained that.
Yeah, there's so many like shoulds floating around it. If I were a new team and doing a Herald, I'd be like, all right, we're going to keep it easy. We're going to do a monologue opening, training wheels, and we're just going to try to start with something that we can remember from the opening. As long as that initiation is clearly from something in the opening, you did great. And then just, that's what you do to start. And you're with an eye towards, we're hoping to make those initiations even more intriguing and funny as we get better at it.
Interesting.
Then move to one of the real openings, probably the invocation. That's the easiest one to start with.
Okay. Do you notice like there's like a progression that people like move through those?
I just made that up.
Oh, okay.
There was a while at UCB where if you were a new Herald team, you were only allowed to do either the pattern game or the sound and movement as an opening. That's all you were allowed to do.
You're only allowed to do those. Okay. Amazing. And so once you're in your first beats, you've got your first line. Hopefully, someone on your team is like, yeah, I know which one you're going with. Here, let's go. Let's play. And then that scene just kind of plays itself out and heightens.
Yeah, the opening is just to get you started. Once you get into the scene, even like 3 lines in, forget the opening.
Right.
Now just play the scene for what it is. Explore it, follow it, maybe it's not going to be exactly what you thought.
Right.
And if one of the nightmares is if I initiate something and you're my scene partner and you have no idea what I'm talking about. You do not remember that from the opening. Right. I noticed that you didn't, or I'm saying it in a way that does not bring it to your mind. and you feel bad. You're like, oh God, what is Will doing? Like, I have no idea what he's doing. That's a hard spot to be in, but it happens a lot.
Sure, yeah, because I mean that group mind has to be there where you're like, yeah, okay, we got this, and now we've communicated it clearly, and now we're both on the same page. And if one person's like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Then you got to kind of like recover, like fight the controls a little bit.
But what you would do is you would just yes and it, and I'd be able to tell, oh, he doesn't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
We're starting from zero. We'll build it from that. That's okay. That happens.
Right.
And my next line, I'll try to either reassert what I'm saying, or maybe we got to find something new.
Right. And your three ideas, you want to make them kind of like pretty dissimilar, which is the point of like the hallways that get you from different rooms, right? Because you don't want three like, oh, here's a guy finding a comb, here's a person buying a comb, and here's a person who's repairing a comb.
You're totally right. Like the 3 scenes should be very different takes, very different tones. Hopefully, your herald will be better if the 3 scenes should start far apart, so that when they connect at the end, it's cool.
Right.
It's like, oh, how do they make those things come together?
Right.
And,
so when making a herald team, would you say like the minimum number is going to be like 6?
Yeah. Yep. 6 is good because then you got 2 people for each of the beats.
Right. And is there like deviation from that? Are there like 4 people herald, 2 people herald team? Like,
yeah, I mean, you could do. I've seen 1 person heralds, which is silly, but pretty commonly, I mean, and at UCB we have 8 people on the team. That's taken from IOs. I think IO would frequently have 8 people, and I think that number is just 6 is good, and then you got 2 reserves, so that every week you'll have at least 6 if people can't show up.
That makes sense. And
also just to get a certain number of people from the classes on the stage. I think 8 is why that's picked. 8's too many. If you have 8 people doing a herald, one of them is going to sort of not end up being involved that much.
Okay.
They're going to be frustrated. But you get used to that. A veteran team that's done a lot of heralds, 3 of them would do great. Like they all know each other. They could go down to 3 and be totally fine.
Okay, interesting. And at UCB,
it's very hard.
Because then you have to switch gears all the time.
My brother and I do 2-person heralds, and it's tough. 3 is hugely easier. 3-person heralds is a really good exercise for class because you're the whole time to take a breath. It's not as hard as it seems. It's a really good workout. 3-person heralds.
So good for like as an exercise, but not necessarily for a show.
Once you can do it for a show, it's a great show too. But it's hard to do right away. Even if you're not good at heralds, if you're in class, doing a 3-person herald is you're in it the whole time, so it's actually really good practice.
Right. Yeah, there's not a lot of downtime, but there's just enough so that you're not like completely.
Maybe the other 2 are doing it, and you get to be in the back just for like a second. It's good.
And what are you doing when you're like watching the other? Like, are you like you're not in the scene? I'm watching the first beat go, and I'm like, okay, what are they doing? Or are you like kind of like half paying attention, like kind of working on your own thing going on?
I mean, ideally, you're watching,
right?
And you're not going to worry about your scene until it's your turn, and your idea is so simple that you don't need to think about it too much.
Right. You've already got that on lock because of the opening.
But that doesn't happen. Your brain is totally sweating over your own ideas, especially when you're new to the herald. Watching the back line of a new herald team during the first beats is funny because everybody's like looking down at their shoes, trying to like think about stuff.
They're like grinding to find the best idea that they can come up with.
The way it is. But theoretically, you're all watching. You know, the third beats, we're going to have to connect and call stuff back. So you need to be paying attention so that if somebody makes a reference to one of these scenes, you recognize it.
Right.
So you need to be watching, especially for the big moments and the iconic moments of the scene. Like you got to feel those.
And in the first beat, are you like building up? Like, how do you know when that first scene ends and the second scene of the first beat comes in? Like, you're just like, okay, built up to a head and boom, let's get it?
Yep.
Okay.
Should be like 3 minutes each. But that can vary hugely. But yeah, when the scene just feels done, sweep it and do the next scene.
Right.
They're usually about 3 minutes. First beats tend to be long, and then second beats medium, and third beats short. So you're going to spend the most time on your first beats.
Okay.
You'll often have rules about first beats, like backline, don't get involved for like a good minute or so. Like let those people
do their thing.
Yeah, the phrase is oppressive backline. You don't want to be an oppressive backline where you're bossing them around and interfering too much.
Okay.
But once they've made some decisions and you can support, you go in and add to it.
Interesting.
But a lot of times New Herald teams will be told no backline support in the first beats. You're not allowed.
Just to like let them do their thing.
Yeah. Until we learn to make choices on our own.
Right.
And then second beats is the time to really everybody gets in there. We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, yeah. And here's the question. Like you guys like backlines. And I mean it makes perfect sense. I understand why they're there and I've used them a bunch of times too. But is backline the ideal set? Like can you do side stage? You guys ever use other?
Oh, yeah. I thought, yeah, we use backlines exclusively at UCB. So when I first saw stuff at other theaters and they were standing on the sides, I was like surprised. I was like, oh yeah, I never even thought of that. I guess it's just personal taste. I don't think that's not a rule, or that's theater culture, you know?
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that because whenever I see a show at UCB, it's like backline is like, yeah, that's the thing. I'm like, oh, I guess that's a house style, and I've seen it in a bunch of places, and it makes ample sense. Like you have like immediate access, you're right there.
Immediate access to the scene is what's good about it.
Yeah.
What's bad about it is you're in the scene the whole time. Like you're just standing back there, and it's a little weird.
Yeah.
I'm used to it, so I like it. But that's in the 6 of 1, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. Cool. And I guess and then your first beats, you do your first one, you do your second one, you do your third one, and then that just launches into group game.
Group game, yeah. The first beat should be, we're going to revisit the first beats at least one more time, and then maybe a third time. So you want them to be like kind of grounded and connected to reality so that it's easy to like expand the world and live there. If it's too silly, it falls apart too soon. So we want to err on the side of being kind of real.
Right. And so like your scenes are probably getting cut before like it escalates beyond kind of the control.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, probably. And you just don't want to have to come back to something that's totally dumb.
Right.
That means that there is a slight level of restraint and gravity in these scenes, which is good. But then the group game is supposed to be more fun and silly.
Yeah, I see.
And kind of wake things up a little bit.
And what are some of the common mistakes that you see people make in like a first beat? Like what's like the thing that like a sin that you see like, oh, okay, this is like a newer person.
They're just all the regular mistakes you make in regular scene work. They're just amplified because now you have to live with it. So if you're a real common one is going too silly, too early, too crazy. That's the most common because the pressure to be funny is so big.
It is.
That you'll just be like, you'll just do something insane like, hey, at this gym, we like to fuck the weight off of you. And it's like kind of offensive and a little weird, and you're not a good enough actor to handle the reality of this. And what does that mean? And do we have to mime sex on stage now? And it's like you got in over your head. You don't know what you're
right. Like what did I just commit myself to?
Yeah. Or just like a general feeling of stupidity is pretty big. Like, whoa, this is the biggest pizza ever. Because you riffed on pizza for a while and things got really silly in the opening. So now it's kind of a vague choice, but it's also crazy, and I don't know how to relate to it in terms of reality.
Like where is this gonna go? Like, wow.
Why is it the biggest pizza? Why are you surprised to see it? There's no good answer to these questions. That's intriguing. But it's the opening kind of tricked you into starting this way. That's pretty common. So like. That's where the be more boring note would be handy. It's like, it doesn't need to be the biggest pizza ever. Just give me something I can relate to from reality, you know?
Right.
A much better start would be like, hey man, you always pick the toppings. I got to pick the toppings today.
Right.
That's a situation I can relate to, and we could extrapolate.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of implications in that line, like of the dynamic between these two people.
But I've certainly, you'll do a week where you're so restrained and held back that you're like, next week I got to go for it. I got to be brave. I got to walk out there with swagger. And you're like, hey, it's the biggest pizza ever. And now you're screwed. You can get out of it. Every scene, there's no initiation that can't lead to a good scene. But those are, so I think that's the most common mistake. Then the other mistake is the polar opposite, which is no choice.
Right.
So vague that nothing is decided. That's so boring. That also dies. Like you do the biggest pizza ever one week, then you come out the next week and you're like, hey, let's get a pizza. That's also bad because there's nothing to unpack. There's nothing intriguing.
Like, what am I supposed to use in that line?
You're not starting in the middle of anything.
Right.
That's also hard. It's hard. See, but the Herald is really intriguing for improvisers because it's hard. Like, I'm sure that if there's improv nerds listening to this, they want to try it because it's like, it's the decathlon of improv forms. If you can do a good Herald, you can do anything. You can do abstract stuff. You can write stuff. You can yes and out of holes. You're a superhero. You can do. There is no improv form that will scare you if you're good at the Herald because you can do anything that comes up.
It sounds like a pretty demanding master.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, and it does sound fun. And I mean, I've seen it be fun. And if you're working, I mean, your first beats are also like the audience's first kind of look at your scene work and like your storytelling, and so you kind of want to engage them on that level too, by having them sit through that opening. You know, made them watch your kind of like idea generation, and now okay, here's the payoff. Here's some candy. Yeah.
But if the initiation is clearly connected to the opening and you yes and right. That's pretty doable.
Yeah.
The audience starts to feel like they're in on it now. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, this connects to that thing, which connected to the suggestion. Oh, all right.
And I think, do you ever get like audiences who are like, well, the second beat, like normally when we're watching a show, like the second scene, it follows immediately from the first scene, whereas in the Herald, your second scene in your first beat goes back to your opening, so it's that whole first beat.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Those aren't linear. Those are kind of parallel.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Because I definitely the first time I saw Harold, I'm like, whoa, what's this? What's happening here? And then like afterwards, I was explaining. I was like, oh, these first 3, and because I saw a connection between all of these things, and like watching a Harold with like zero explanation.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what's happening? There's a whole bunch of connections here. I couldn't pick out the structure of it wasn't intuitive. And so it was like, oh, and then I had it explained to me. I was like, oh, okay. That makes way more sense.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a leap of faith before like everything starts to tie together. But I mean, you know, sitcoms might be a better analogy. Like sitcoms will jump in the initial act.
Right.
You will jump between 2 or 3 stories, which maybe are all related to a theme, but it might just be, you know, the A story is your star and the other person, and then the B story is the 2 nincompoops that live next door, and then the third scene is some side character out in the world somewhere. So we're used to it to some degree, to having separate threads that are going to come together.
Do you remember like your first Harold, or like where your first exposure to it was?
Yeah. 1998, Solo Arts Theater. I'd heard about the UCB in the New York Times and from another improv class I was taking. So I looked it up, found there was a thing called Herald Night, which I didn't know what that was. And actually, I knew the word Herald because I'd read Truth and Comedy.
Right.
They talk about the Herald, but they're pretty vague about it.
It is, yeah. I mean, until the UCB manual came out, I always felt like there was no good book on the Herald.
Right. So, and it had been a while since I read Truth and Comedy, and I walked and I yeah, in the opening, they were doing like a graffiti opening where they'd get a suggestion. Everybody was like pretending to tag graffiti, but they were saying like mantras inspired by the suggestion. And that looked weird. Then they swept it. I'd never seen a sweep before, but that was pretty. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's over now. And then the first scene was 2 people sitting on the hood of the car, a couple, and she wants to like kiss him. And he wants to talk about how he wishes someday his brain could be replaced with a CD-ROM. That he dreams of artificial intelligence, and she's just trying to get his attention. And I remember And then the second Herald was they asked for a suggestion of somebody's grandfather's name. What's the name of somebody's grandfather? And then somebody said their grandfather's name. And then everybody said, ah, yes, I remember so-and-so, and started to make up fake stories about this name. That was their opening.
Huh.
And, you know, the scenes were hit or miss. So I saw 2 Heralds. But I really liked it. Like, it looked cool. Like,
Right.
I could tell that I was left out a little bit of like what exactly was going on, but I wasn't totally left out. Some of the scenes were really good, and there just was an integrity to it. It was like listening to a Bob Dylan album for the first time, where I was like, this doesn't sound good, but I think it might actually be good. I have to figure it out, kind of.
One of the earliest Heralds I saw was at Just for Laughs here in Montreal. I think it was the UCB4 plus Tina Fey and possibly Horatio Sands.
That makes sense, yeah.
And they're amazing performers. And I don't even think I realized, I saw they were doing kind of all these connected scenes, and I don't even think at the time I realized that what was happening. I was just like, people are amazing. What's that?
What year was that?
Oh boy. I honestly don't recall. It had to have been, it was at least 2000.
Yeah, because I don't think, they moved from Chicago to New York in '96, and they weren't doing a lot of Heralds from that point on. But that's not to say they wouldn't do one, but it would have to be pretty.
Right. Maybe it wasn't a Herald. Maybe it was just a bunch of scenes. I honestly, at that time, I wouldn't be able to tell.
Montage, because I don't think they would make Tina do a Herald. The 4 of them might have done one if it was just the 4 of them.
Oh, but then you know what? I'm thinking there was no opening, so either they cut it. It might have just been montage then.
It was a montage, but certainly they had done so many Heralds in their life that they would naturally bring stuff back.
Right.
I mean, the UCB's sketch show on Comedy Central was always structured like a Herald.
Right.
3 group games, second beats, like tied together at the end. It's a Herald.
Yeah, definitely. Like I've watched it, and I was like, oh, I totally see what's happening here.
Yeah.
And UCB's has a whole bunch of like Herald teams, right? And there's like a huge like audition process too. That's like,
dude, it is. Yeah, it's like the heart of the theater and the source of all anxiety. Is you take classes and you want to get on a Herald team. The auditions are like once a year, sometimes twice a year, and people freak the fuck out.
Right, because there's like lineups down the block to get in on this.
There'll be like 8 people added, maybe 16 people added. So there's like 8 teams, that's 64 people. Then there's maybe 4 to 5 improv teams that are not on, that used to be in Herald Night, that are now like weekend shows. So let's say there's 4 of those. So there's 64 people, and then 32 people who have reached tenure. And then like now we have these minor league teams. That's another 48 people. So, you know, there's like 100 odd spots, 120. Auditions come once a year, and 600 people will audition. Right. And they'll be adding 8 maybe. And they'll be cutting people from the regular teams. Everyone just freaks the fuck. In New York, I think they're happening in March. And I live in LA. I'm not auditioning, but I even caught wind of that. Like, oh, auditions are coming up in March.
Right. It's like it's on the winds coming.
Yeah. When I was in UCB, they just picked people from class. You finished level 3 and they just picked people. There was no audition.
It was just small enough you didn't have to worry about it.
It was like 3 level 3 classes. One guy taught all of them, so he just picked.
Okay.
Then about a year later, they started doing auditions, and there was like a couple hundred people who would audition at that time.
Okay, wow.
It was hard then, but it's infinitely harder now.
That's crazy.
Although not as hard as Groundlings. Like Groundlings is even more selective and hard to move up that ladder.
Yeah,
but UCB is still pretty tough.
Yeah. And like, how often? Like, so is it like annually that the Herald teams get remade?
Yeah. In LA, the auditions were in September, and the teams got announced in October.
Okay. That must be quite the process. Are you part of that decision process?
I have been in the past, but I've removed myself because it's too stressful. Like, the artistic director out here, it's Mike Still. He makes the decision, And yeah, he generally, I mean, he'll always have other senior teachers watching the auditions with him to like consult with, you know, and to get everybody's opinion. And maybe people will be like, oh, you know, did you see this person in class? Was this audition representative of them? There's a lot of discussion.
I can only imagine.
And
I mean, we have house teams and we have auditions, and yeah, it's much tinier scale, but even on our scale, it's like, oh, this is kind of a deal.
yeah, I mean, auditions are a really tough process any which way you do it, and
Of course,
this is the only way onto the stage. Or that's not true, but it is one of the only ways to be considered a member of the UCB theater without a doubt is to be on a Herald team. Like, there's no argument that you are part of the UCB theater, so people want that. You might have a show at the UCB, but you don't necessarily feel like you're a part of it. If you're in a Herald team, you're in. And so
how
hunger for that.
do people get show like non-UCB? Like, what are the other ways to like, who are the other people who are doing shows at UCB?
As an audition process just for shows where you can send in a script of a show, and the AD might let you do a tryout show where either he'll watch it or it'll be taped and he'll watch, and then if he likes it, he'll give it like a run, and then you have a show at UCB, and you don't need to be anybody.
Right.
It helps, but members of the house teams are favored for those spots.
Right.
Their show doesn't have to be as evolved, as good, as proven, because it'll be like, we know you, we've seen your work on Herald Night. This is your show. Well, this seems kind of undercooked, but it does seem like a good idea. It's not totally undercooked. All right, you can give it a shot.
Okay.
But if you're a total stranger, it's got to be like, this looks great. Let's try it.
Got it.
Tough.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's call it here. I think that's the end of episode 2.
All right, Vinny, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Will. And next time we talk, it'll be about group games and second beats.
Cool.